Hollywood's swashbuckling golden boy harbored a vicious hatred for the very director who made him famous. A professional partnership masking years of dangerous on-set abuse, bitter personal resentment, and a blood feud that would poison both men's lives until their dying days. The screaming match erupted on the set of The Charge of the Light Brigade in 1936. A furious Errol Flynn stormed across the battlefield set, his face twisted with rage. The cameras had stopped rolling. The crew froze. Extras in British military uniforms stood paralyzed, watching the real drama unfold. "You're trying to kill me, you bastard!" Flynn shouted at director. According to multiple accounts, the Australian actor had just discovered that Curtiz had rigged a tripwire to make horses fall during the cavalry charge, a dangerous stunt that killed several animals and nearly took Flynn's life. The actor had been thrown from his mount, narrowly missing a fatal impact with the rocky California terrain. Curtiz, the Hungarian taskmaster, didn't back down. "I make movie, not nursery," he reportedly barked back in his broken English, gesturing wildly with his megaphone. "You want to be star? Then you take risk. John Barrymore would do it without crying like baby." It wasn't their first confrontation. It wouldn't be their last. But in that moment, something fundamentally broke between them. A relationship that would produce some of cinema's greatest classics while breeding one of Hollywood's most venomous hatreds. As Flynn later wrote in his autobiography, "In that moment, I knew I would never forgive him. Not ever." How did the dashing hero of Captain Blood, Robin Hood, and the Seahawk come to despise the very man who helped create his legendary status? Why did the director deliberately push his star to the breaking point again and again? And how did they continue working together for years despite this animosity, creating timeless classics while privately wishing for each other's destruction? Buckle up. The truth behind this silver screen feud goes far deeper than anyone knew. A Hollywood story of ego, power, and revenge that never made it into the fan magazines. Tasmania, 1909. A boy named Errol Leslie Thompson Flynn is born to a respected marine biologist father and young mother. His early years are a patchwork of privilege, adventure, and neglect, foreshadowing the contradictions that would define him. The young Flynn, unruly and willful from the start, spent more time exploring the Tasmanian wilderness than sitting in classrooms. "I was born with the devil in me," Flynn would later write, romanticizing a childhood that was far more troubled than he publicly admitted. His father, brilliant but distant, spent months away on scientific expeditions. His mother, overwhelmed by her son's wild temperament, increasingly gave up trying to control him. By his teens, Flynn had been expelled from multiple schools across Australia and England, his academic record a trail of disruption, fighting, and rebellion. Handsome, athletic, and utterly irreverent, he drifted through a series of odd jobs across Australia and New Guinea. Gold prospector, shipping clerk, plantation overseer, and even diamond smuggler, if his own accounts are to be believed. Trouble followed him like a shadow. Bar fights, failed businesses, even brief stints in jail for theft and embezzlement charges that never quite stuck. But the camera loved him. After a chance encounter with Australian filmmaker Charles Chauvel, Flynn landed his first film role in the Wake of the Bounty. His raw charisma practically burned through the celluloid. He had no training, no technique, just a natural magnetism that made it impossible to look away. Meanwhile, across the world, Michael Curtiz was already an established director with a very different origin story. Born Mano Kertész Kaminer in Budapest in 1886, he had directed dozens of films in Hungary and Austria before fleeing Europe as World War I collapsed empires and redrew borders. His upbringing in the Austro-Hungarian Empire had instilled both artistic ambition and iron discipline. Unlike Flynn's haphazard entry into film, Curtiz had studied deliberately, training at the Royal Academy of Theatre and Art in Budapest, before methodically working his way up from actor to director. By 1912, he was already directing films in Hungary. When political upheaval made Europe untenable, he engineered his own immigration to America with the single-minded determination that would become his trademark. By 1926, Curtiz had landed at Warner Brothers. Methodical, exacting, and notoriously temperamental, he earned a reputation as a brilliant visual stylist. and a terror to his actors. His heavily accented English created both confusion and comedy on set, but nobody questioned his command of the camera. Warner Brothers valued him for his efficiency as much as his artistry. Curtiz could deliver complex films on schedule and under budget, a rare combination in Hollywood. The language barrier was more than a simple matter of accent. Curtiz mangled English in ways that became legendary in Hollywood. "Bring on the empty horses," he once called, wanting riderless horses for a scene. His command, "the son of a bitch, wanter for water," became a running joke. Yet this same man could compose shots of breathtaking visual eloquence. He simply couldn't articulate his vision in words. Warner Brothers cast the unknown Flynn in Captain Blood as a risky move. The studio needed a new male lead after the death of Douglas Fairbanks, and the tall, athletic Australian seemed to fit the bill. They assigned their reliable workhorse director, Curtiz, to keep the production on track and to shape this raw material into a bankable star. Magic happened. Captain Blood was an instant hit, transforming Flynn from nobody to star overnight. Critics raved about his natural charm, his athletic swordplay, his magnetic screen presence. Audiences, particularly women, couldn't get enough. Fan mail flooded the studio. Flynn's likeness appeared on magazine covers across America. Warner Brothers knew they had struck gold. On the surface, Curtiz and Flynn appeared to form a powerful partnership. The director's visual flair and the actor's natural charisma created box office gold. Warner Brothers quickly paired them again for The Charge of the Light Brigade, eager to capitalize on their chemistry. Studio publicity photos showed them smiling together, discussing scenes apparently in perfect harmony. The public saw dashing adventure films. They saw Flynn's rakish smile on magazine covers, his name in glowing reviews. They saw Curtiz collecting accolades for his innovative camera work and epic battle scenes. They saw a match made in Hollywood heaven. What they didn't see was the growing resentment between star and director, the clashing egos, the fundamental difference in their approach to filmmaking and to life itself. Curtiz, the European perfectionist who would sacrifice anything for his art. Flynn, the natural talent who resented the director's methods, his authority, and ultimately his abuse. Their competing visions of masculinity, Curtiz's old-world discipline versus Flynn's colonial adventurer spirit, created friction from day one. Their 8 films together would define the adventure genre and set the template for action heroes for generations to come. Behind the scenes, however, the story was far darker. Few Hollywood partnerships have produced such magnificent art through such obvious personal antipathy. For 12 years, Flynn and Curtiz created cinema magic while privately nursing wounds and grievances that would eventually explode into open hostility. Who really held the power in this toxic relationship? What drove Flynn's particular hatred for Curtiz above all his other Hollywood enemies? And why did these two men, who reportedly could barely stand to be in the same room, continue making films together long after their mutual disgust became obvious to everyone on set? The troubles began on day one. Flynn, completely inexperienced in Hollywood filmmaking, arrived on the Captain Blood set in 1935 expecting guidance. What he got instead was Curtiz's infamous sink-or-swim approach. "Action!" Curtiz would shout, then berate the novice actor for every mistake. According to Flynn's autobiography, My Wicked, Wicked Ways, the director refused to explain scenes or offer direction, preferring to humiliate his star into improvement. "I thought directors helped actors," Flynn reportedly complained to co-star Olivia de Havilland. "This man just stands there waiting for me to fail." Curtiz's English, heavily accented and often unintentionally hilarious, created constant confusion. When he wanted Flynn to show more passion in a scene, he reportedly screamed, "More sex! More sex!" in front of the entire crew, mortifying the young actor. When Flynn missed his mark, Curtiz would erupt, "For why you walking there? Dumbbell, the camera is here." The humiliation was methodical and relentless. According to set reports, Curtiz would deliberately shoot Flynn's scenes at the end of exhausting 14-hour days, when the inexperienced actor was most likely to make mistakes. He would then loudly criticize these mistakes in front of the entire cast and crew. One particularly vicious incident occurred during a sword-fighting sequence. Flynn, despite his natural athleticism, was struggling with the choreography. After several unsatisfactory takes, Curtiz called in veteran actor Basil Rathbone and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Show this amateur how a real actor does it." For Flynn, raised in Australia's macho culture, public humiliation was unbearable. Yet he couldn't quit. This was his one big chance. Studio head Jack Warner had taken a massive gamble on the unknown actor, and walking away meant career suicide. As Flynn later wrote, "I was trapped between the devil and the deep blue sea, Curtiz on one side and unemployment on the other." Biographers note that Flynn, while projecting confidence, harbored deep insecurities about his acting abilities. Curtiz seemed to instinctively target these vulnerabilities, pushing Flynn not through encouragement, but through shame. "I don't need actors to like me," Curtiz reportedly told a producer. "I need them to fear me." Despite, or perhaps because of, this trial by fire, Flynn's performance in Captain Blood was revelatory. His unnatural athleticism made the sword-fighting sequences believable. His easy charm and good looks translated perfectly to the screen. Almost overnight, he became a sensation. Moviegoers lined up around blocks to see this new star. Critics compared him favorably to Douglas Fairbanks, the previous king of adventure films, but the success came at a cost. Flynn later wrote that during Captain Blood, he learned to hate the sound of Michael Curtiz's voice. What should have been his triumph felt tainted by the director's methods. He had expected to feel pride in his first major film. Instead, he felt only relief that the ordeal was over. And this was just the beginning. Warner Brothers, seeing dollar signs, immediately planned to reunite their new star with their veteran director. Flynn's nightmare was just getting started and about to become considerably worse. November 1935. Still reeling from the grueling Captain Blood shoot, Flynn found himself on an even more challenging set. The Charge of the Light Brigade, a historical epic about the Crimean War, would require massive battle sequences, hundreds of extras, and dangerous stunt work. From the start, Curtiz made it clear he valued the shot over actor safety. According to multiple accounts, he repeatedly placed Flynn in physical danger during action sequences, dismissing the actor's concerns as cowardice. "Your pretty face not on camera in this shot," he reportedly told Flynn before a dangerous fall. "So no problem if you get hurt." Flynn, now a rising star, began pushing back. He questioned Curtiz's methods, challenged his decisions, and occasionally refused to perform stunts he deemed unnecessarily dangerous. The director responded by isolating Flynn, communicating through assistants rather than addressing him directly. The breaking point came during filming of the climactic charge. To create realistic falls, Curtiz had tripwires installed that would catch the horse's legs at full gallop, a technique already considered inhumane even by 1930s standards. He deliberately concealed this plan from Flynn, knowing the actor would object. The results were catastrophic. Dozens of horses were severely injured. Several had to be euthanized on set. Stuntmen suffered broken bones and concussions. Flynn himself was nearly killed when his horse fell at full speed, throwing him clear but landing just inches from his head. Flynn, an avid horseman who prided himself on his riding skills, was horrified. The animal's suffering affected him more deeply than his own close call. "The screaming of those horses haunted me for weeks," he later wrote. "It was needless, pointless cruelty in service of a damn movie." According to David Niven, who witnessed the incident, Flynn confronted Curtiz directly. "You lousy Hungarian bastard. You're a murderer. I'll kill you for this." Studio security reportedly had to separate the men as Flynn lunged at the director, fists clenched, face contorted with rage. Curtiz's response was chillingly calm. "The shot looks good," he reportedly said. "Very realistic." The incident prompted Flynn to contact the ASPCA, resulting in Warner Brothers being fined for animal cruelty. More significantly, it led to the creation of the American Humane Association's film division and the now familiar "No Animals Were Harmed" certification in movies. For Flynn, this wasn't just about animal welfare. It represented everything he had come to despise about Curtiz: his callousness, his artistic ruthlessness, his complete disregard for anything but the finished product. The tripwire incident confirmed Flynn's growing suspicion that Curtiz wasn't merely a demanding director. He was, in Flynn's view, a genuinely cruel human being. Curtiz, meanwhile, viewed Flynn's outrage as more evidence of the actor's softness. The director, who had survived World War and Revolution in Europe, had little patience for what he saw as American sentimentality. "Movie's not real," he reportedly told Jack Warner when the studio chief questioned his methods. "War is real. Revolution is real. This is just pictures." By 1938, Flynn was one of Warner Brothers' biggest stars. The Adventures of Robin Hood, shot in the glorious Technicolor with a massive budget, was designed to be his definitive vehicle, the film that would cement his status as Hollywood's premier action hero. Behind the scenes, Flynn had begun asserting himself. According to studio memos uncovered by film historian Rudy Belmer, Flynn specifically requested a different director for Robin Hood. In a letter to producer Hal Wallace, he wrote, "I believe a fresh approach would benefit both the picture and my performance. Mr. Curtiz and I have artistic differences that have become increasingly difficult to reconcile." Jack Warner refused, insisting on the successful partnership continuing. The studio chief was unmoved by Flynn's complaints, noting in a memo to Wallace, "The Tasmanian thinks he's Barrymore now. Let Curtiz knock him down a peg." The Robin Hood production started badly and got worse. Flynn, now more confident in his abilities and increasingly resentful of Curtiz's tyranny, began challenging the director's decisions openly on set. Curtiz responded by isolating Flynn, communicating through assistants rather than speaking to him directly, a psychological tactic designed to emphasize the actor's subordinate position. One particularly heated exchange occurred over the famous entrance scene, where Robin Hood swings in on a rope. Flynn wanted to perform the stunt himself. Curtiz insisted on a double. According to assistant director Robert Vreeland, the argument escalated until Flynn, in a show of defiance, grabbed the rope and performed the stunt before Curtiz could stop him. The take, captured by a quick-thinking camera operator, ended up in the final film. The most bitter conflict came over the film's legendary sword-fighting scenes. Flynn had become an accomplished screen fencer and had specific ideas about staging the climactic duel with Basil Rathbone. He had worked extensively with fencing master Fred Cavins to develop a distinctive fighting style that balanced theatrical flair with authentic technique. According to Flynn's longtime friend and stunt double Buster Wiles, Flynn choreographed several of the fight sequences himself, spending hours with Rathbone and Cavins perfecting the movements. When these scenes drew praise from studio executives during early screenings, Curtiz reportedly took full credit. "He stole my work," Flynn later told film historian Rudy Belmer in a 1955 interview. "I created those sequences with the fencing master, and Curtiz claimed it was all his direction. He couldn't tell a foil from a saber, yet he took bows for fight scenes he barely watched us film." This pattern of appropriation extended to other aspects of the production. Flynn had suggested several of the film's most memorable visual sequences, including Robin's famous archery contest disguise and the dramatic final duel's shadows on the castle walls. In each case, Curtiz claimed full creative ownership. Adding insult to injury, Curtiz received an Oscar nomination for directing Robin Hood, while Flynn, despite giving the performance that defined his career, received nothing. The director attended the Academy Awards ceremony, where he lost to Frank Capra for "You Can't Take It With You." But his nomination still burned Flynn, who believed he deserved at least equal recognition for the film's success. The film's phenomenal success only deepened the rift. Flynn's resentment grew as Curtiz's reputation as a genius director solidified, while the actor found himself increasingly typecast as merely a handsome action star. Critics praised Curtiz's visual imagination, while often dismissing Flynn as simply playing himself, a characterization that deeply wounded the actor, who worked harder on his performances than most critics recognized. Behind his swashbuckling smile, Flynn was seething, and Curtiz knew it. According to set reports, the director took every opportunity to remind Flynn of his Oscar nomination, once even bringing the invitation letter to the set and reading it aloud between takes, a deliberate provocation that nearly led to blows. The pattern was set. Their most successful collaboration had produced their most bitter conflict, and their next film together would push Flynn to physical collapse. By 1940, Flynn's lifestyle had begun catching up with him. Heavy drinking, constant smoking, and a string of venereal diseases had taken a toll on the once indestructible actor. At just 31, he looked noticeably older and struggled with stamina. The Flynn curse, the family history of early death that haunted the actor, was beginning to manifest. Early medical reports, kept secret by the studio, had already detected the heart murmur that would eventually kill him. Warner Brothers' medical staff had advised reducing physical demands on their star. Curtiz, preparing to direct Flynn in The Seahawk, saw these medical reports and ignored them completely. Instead, according to multiple crew accounts, he deliberately scheduled the most physically demanding sequences at the end of 14-hour shooting days, when Flynn was exhausted. He insisted on take after take of strenuous sword fights and climbing sequences, pushing Flynn beyond reasonable limits. The massive ship-to-ship battle sequence required Flynn to engage in extended sword fights while swinging between vessels on a rope. The set was built over tanks of water, and the heavy period costumes, including metal armor pieces, presented a genuine drowning risk. After several grueling takes in the hot studio lights, Flynn reportedly collapsed on set from exhaustion and dehydration. According to production assistant Vincent Sherman, Curtiz stood over the fallen actor and said loudly enough for others to hear, "Your father would be ashamed of you." It was a deliberately cruel jab. Flynn had a complicated relationship with his father, Professor Theodore Flynn, whose academic success had always made Errol feel inadequate. The elder Flynn had repeatedly expressed disappointment in his son's choice of profession, considering acting beneath the family's intellectual tradition. Curtiz, ever the psychological tactician, had found the perfect pressure point. Flynn was carried to his dressing room. Production shut down for 3 days while he recovered, costing the studio thousands. When filming resumed, the hatred between star and director had reached new heights. They now communicated exclusively through intermediaries, even when standing feet apart on set. Flynn later confided to David Niven that during The Seahawk, he had fantasized about pushing Curtiz overboard from the elevated ship set, a fall that likely would have killed the director. "I actually found myself stepping toward him with that intention," Flynn admitted. "Then I caught myself. The bastard nearly turned me into a murderer." Olivia de Havilland, who worked with both men on multiple films, later remarked, "You could feel it in the air." They communicated through third parties whenever possible. The set would go silent when they were forced to speak directly. It was like watching two predators circling each other, waiting for a moment of weakness. Yet somehow, the finished film betrayed none of this hostility. The Seahawk stands as one of their finest collaborations, proof that art can emerge from even the most toxic creative relationships. Critics praised both Flynn's performance and Curtiz's direction, unaware of the real drama behind the scenes. October 1942. Flynn's personal life exploded into scandal when he was charged with statutory rape of 2 teenage girls. The sensational trial threatened to end his career, regardless of the verdict. American troops were fighting overseas, and Flynn, whose repeated medical exemptions from service already raised eyebrows, now stood accused of preying on young girls while others sacrificed for their country. The media coverage was merciless. Headlines screamed, "Flynn's bedroom habits exposed," and "swashbuckler or girl molester." Morality groups called for boycotts of his films. His face, once the symbol of heroic adventure, now appeared on tabloid covers alongside lurid allegations. While most of Hollywood distanced themselves from the embattled star, a standard practice during scandal, Flynn noticed one particularly vocal critic, Michael Curtiz. According to Flynn's friend David Niven, Curtiz told reporters that he always knew Flynn was no good and that he never trusted him with young women on set. The betrayal cut deep. After years of professional conflict, Flynn expected Curtiz to at least remain neutral about his personal troubles. Instead, the director seemed eager to twist the knife. Curtiz reportedly went further, sharing stories with journalists about Flynn's on-set behavior with female extras. Stories that, true or not, damaged Flynn's defense narrative. In one particularly damaging interview with Luella Parsons, Curtiz suggested that Warner Brothers had previously settled similar complaints against Flynn to keep them out of the press. Flynn was ultimately acquitted, but the trial permanently damaged his reputation. The phrase "in like Flynn" entered the American lexicon as a crude sexual reference. More significantly, his boyish, heroic image was tarnished beyond repair. The public no longer fully believed in Flynn as the pure-hearted hero he portrayed on screen. In his autobiography, Flynn blamed several Hollywood figures for abandoning him during this period, but he reserved special venom for Curtiz. Some who called themselves colleagues revealed their true colors. None more disappointingly than the Hungarian taskmaster who had profited most from my name on marquees. The betrayal transformed Flynn's professional hatred into something more personal. Before the trial, he had despised Curtiz as a director and colleague. Now he despised him as a human being. According to Flynn's friend Buster Wiles, the actor kept a private list of accounts to settle after his acquittal. Curtiz's name was at the top, underlined 3 times. The studio, sensing the escalating hostility, separated the men for several years. Their next collaboration wouldn't come until 1945 with Objective Burma, and by then, everything had changed. Between 1941 and 1945, Flynn found what he had been seeking all along, a director who treated him with respect. Raoul Walsh, a veteran filmmaker with a reputation for professionalism, directed Flynn in several successful films, including They Died With Their, Boots On, and Gentleman Jim. The contrast between Walsh and Curtiz could not have been more stark. Where Curtiz belittled and berated, Walsh collaborated and consulted. Where Curtiz demanded, Walsh suggested. The results spoke for themselves. Flynn delivered some of his most nuanced performances under Walsh's direction, showing dramatic range that went beyond the swashbuckling heroics of his Curtiz films. Working with Walsh was a revelation, Flynn later wrote. For the first time, I felt like an artist rather than a trained animal. He asked for my input, valued my ideas, and treated me as a partner rather than a puppet. Walsh also protected Flynn from the studio's more unreasonable demands, particularly regarding his deteriorating health. When Warner Brothers pushed for physically demanding sequences, Walsh would often find creative alternatives or use doubles more extensively, preserving Flynn's energy for the dramatic moments that required his full presence. Their working relationship quickly blossomed into friendship. Walsh, an adventurer himself who had lost an eye filming in Mexico, shared Flynn's love of sailing, hunting, and hard drinking. Unlike the austere, work-obsessed Curtiz, Walsh understood Flynn's need for pleasure and recreation. This professional and personal alliance made Curtiz deeply jealous. According to studio memos, he complained repeatedly to Jack Warner about Flynn's films with Walsh, criticizing everything from their pacing to their visual style. More tellingly, he began lobbying for another chance to direct Flynn, claiming their past successes proved they belonged together. Warner, always focused on the bottom line, eventually agreed. Despite Flynn's vehement objections, the studio had reunited him with Curtiz for Objective Burma in 1945. The result would be their final and perhaps most bitter collaboration. 1945 World War II was ending. Flynn, now 36, had been declared 4F due to a heart condition, tuberculosis, and malaria, a source of deep shame for the action star as thousands of American men his age fought and died overseas. Eager to contribute to the war effort through film, Flynn lobbied hard for the lead in Objective Burma. The war drama represented a chance to break from his swashbuckling image and prove himself as a serious actor. The role of Captain Nelson, a paratrooper leading a dangerous mission behind enemy lines, offered Flynn the opportunity to portray modern heroism rather than period adventure. Warner Brothers assigned Curtiz to direct, their first reunion in 3 years. According to production reports, the set was initially civil, with both men behaving professionally. But the old tensions simmered beneath the surface. Flynn, his confidence bolstered by his successful collaboration with Walsh, was no longer the easily intimidated novice of Captain Blood. Curtiz, irritated by Flynn's newfound assertiveness, looked for opportunities to reassert control. The breaking point came during filming of a grueling jungle march sequence. Flynn, whose health had continued to deteriorate, struggled with the physical demands. The Burma set, constructed on the Warner Brothers back lot during a Southern California summer, reached temperatures above 100 degrees under the hot lights. After several unsatisfactory takes, Curtiz exploded. "You're a disgrace," he reportedly shouted. "Look at you!" The great action hero who can't even climb a hill without panting like old woman. According to Flynn's stand-in, the director then turned to the assembled extras. many of whom were actual military veterans hired for authenticity, and said, "This is your movie star. Too weak to fight real war, too weak to even pretend." The veterans, many of whom had grown up watching Flynn's heroic adventures, witnessed their childhood idol being humiliated. Several later reported feeling uncomfortable with Curtiz's behavior, considering it unnecessarily cruel. Flynn, humiliated in front of men who had actually served, a point of deep sensitivity given his own inability to enlist, walked off set. Production halted for 2 days, while Jack Warner personally negotiated his return. According to studio memos, Flynn demanded Curtiz apologize. The director refused. Warner ultimately brokered an uneasy compromise, keeping both men on the picture, but ensuring their direct interaction was minimal. When the film was released, critical response was mixed, but many reviewers specifically criticized Flynn's performance as unconvincing and lacking grit, assessments that echoed Curtiz's on-set criticisms. The British press was particularly harsh, objecting to the film's suggestion that American forces had fought in Burma when the campaign had been primarily British and Australian. The controversy led Warner Brothers to withdraw the film from UK release with an apology. For Flynn, it was the final straw. The critical response, the British backlash, and the on-set humiliation converged to create a perfect storm of professional embarrassment. He informed Warner Brothers he would never work with Curtiz again. After 8 films and countless confrontations, Hollywood's most productive yet poisonous partnership was finally over. But the story doesn't end there. 3 years later, Flynn was offered the lead in Adventures of Don Juan, a big-budget attempt to recapture his swashbuckling glory days. The studio initially suggested Curtiz as director, a move Flynn vehemently opposed. According to Warner Brothers memos uncovered by film historians, Flynn made an unprecedented demand. Not only would he refuse to work with Curtiz, but he wanted contractual approval over who would direct. This kind of power was rarely granted to actors in the studio era, when talent was considered interchangeable and replaceable. Flynn, however, now possessed a unique form of leverage. His personal scandals, declining health, and increasingly visible alcoholism had made him a less bankable star. Yet Warner Brothers needed a hit, and they believed Flynn and another swashbuckler could deliver box office gold. The studio found itself in the uncomfortable position of needing Flynn more than he needed them. The studio, facing Flynn's potential walkout, capitulated. Vincent Sherman was assigned to direct, and production began smoothly. But Flynn hadn't forgotten his nemesis. His revenge would be more subtle and more damaging to Curtiz's ego than simply refusing to work with him. In a move of exquisite professional revenge, Flynn specifically requested that several key production staff from previous Curtiz films be hired for Don Juan, including cinematographer Elmer Dyer and fencing master Fred Cavins. He then worked closely with them to recreate the visual style and action sequences that had become Curtiz's trademark. According to Sherman's autobiography, Flynn was explicit about his intentions. "I want this to look exactly like a Curtiz film, only better. I want to show that the Curtiz touch had nothing to do with Curtiz." Flynn immersed himself in the production as never before, reviewing daily footage, suggesting camera angles, and working closely with the film's editor. He pushed himself physically, despite his declining health, insisting on performing more stunts than his condition should have allowed. The motivation was clear. He wanted to prove, once and for all, that the success of his earlier swashbucklers had been his doing, not Curtiz's. When Adventures of Don Juan was released, several critics noted its visual similarities to earlier Flynn-Curtiz collaborations, particularly The Adventures of Robin Hood. Some even mistakenly credited Curtiz in their reviews, an error Flynn reportedly found deliciously satisfying. The Los Angeles Times wrote that the film recaptures the magic of the Flynn-Curtiz partnership while adding a new maturity, apparently unaware that Curtiz had nothing to do with the production. For Flynn, this confusion was the sweetest vindication. After years of watching Curtiz receive credit for their collaborative successes, he had proven, at least to himself, that the magic could be replicated without the Hungarian director. As he allegedly told David Niven at the film's premiere, "The old bastard is replaceable after all. I always knew it." Curtiz, meanwhile, had moved on to new collaborations, winning an Oscar for Casablanca and continuing his prolific career at Warner Brothers. He never publicly acknowledged Flynn's attempt to undermine his artistic legacy. When asked about Flynn in a 1950 interview, he reportedly said only, "We made some good pictures. The rest is not important." Their paths would never professionally cross again. The 8-film partnership that defined both their careers was over, leaving behind classic films, bitter memories, and one of Hollywood's greatest unspoken feuds. The end of their professional relationship did nothing to diminish Flynn's hatred. If anything, it seemed to grow stronger with time and distance. Throughout the late 1940s and early 1950s, as both men's careers began their inevitable decline, Flynn increasingly blamed Curtiz for his professional troubles. According to those close to the actor, Flynn believed Curtiz had deliberately damaged him physically and mentally during their collaborations. He attributed his heart problems partly to the physical strain Curtiz had put him through on films like The Seahawk, In Charge of the Light Brigade. More significantly, he claimed that the psychological abuse had driven him to the alcoholism that increasingly defined his public image. "Curtiz broke something in me," Flynn reportedly told journalist Hedy Lamarr in a 1952 interview that was never published during his lifetime. "He made me doubt myself in ways I never recovered from. When someone tells you you're worthless often enough, you start to believe it. Then you start to live it." Flynn's drinking, always heavy, became truly problematic in the years following their partnership. Friends noted that he would become particularly bitter and angry about Curtiz when intoxicated, sometimes spending entire evenings recounting grievances from films they had made a decade earlier. Curtiz, for his part, increasingly dismissed Flynn in professional conversations. As the actor's star faded and his films began to underperform, Curtiz reportedly told colleagues that Flynn had wasted his gifts and become a drunk, conveniently ignoring his own role in their toxic relationship. The Hungarian director, whose own career was beginning to wane in the changing Hollywood landscape of the 1950s, began to rewrite history in interviews, emphasizing his own contributions to their successful films while minimizing Flynn's. In a particularly cutting 1954 interview with Film Quarterly, Curtiz suggested that any handsome man could have played those parts. The direction was what mattered. When Flynn heard about these comments, he reportedly flew into a rage, smashing a framed Robin Hood poster in his home and cutting his hand badly enough to require stitches. The incident, witnessed by Flynn's yacht captain, illustrated how raw the wounds remained, even a decade after their last collaboration. Their mutual bitterness might have remained a private matter, known only to Hollywood insiders, had Flynn not decided to make it public in the most dramatic way possible. Despite the intense animosity, both men occasionally acknowledged, usually to third parties, a grudging respect for each other's talents. Flynn, for all his hatred of Curtiz's methods, recognized the director's visual brilliance. In a 1959 interview, shortly before his death, he admitted, "The bastard knew how to make me look good. I'll give him that. Every frame he shot made you believe I was the hero I was pretending to be." During a retrospective screening of The Adventures of Robin Hood in 1957, Flynn reportedly leaned over to a companion during the famous duel sequence and whispered, "Hate the man, but my God, he knew where to put the camera." Curtiz, typically less sentimental, nonetheless defended Flynn's talent to studio executives. When Warner Brothers began to doubt Flynn's bankability after his legal troubles, Curtiz reportedly told Jack Warner, "He is difficult, yes, but on camera there is no one better. The audience believes him." This professional respect never translated to personal warmth. By all accounts, they maintained their mutual dislike until the end. But their creative conflict produced an alchemy that defined a genre. Film historians note that neither man's career ever quite reached the same heights after their partnership dissolved. Flynn's health and reputation continued to decline throughout the 1950s. His later films, while occasionally successful, lacked the magic of his swashbuckling classics. He became increasingly typecast as a parody of his former self, playing alcoholic has-beens in films like The Sun Also Rises, 1957, roles that uncomfortably mirrored his real life. Curtiz, while still prolific, never again directed films with quite the same energy and visual flair as his Flynn collaborations. As studio filmmaking changed in the 1950s, his style began to seem dated. Younger directors like Elia Kazan and Nicholas Ray brought a new psychological realism to Hollywood that made Curtiz's brand of high adventure seem quaint and old-fashioned. In the end, they needed each other, a reality both men seemingly recognized but could never accept. Their conflict had created a unique chemistry that neither could replicate with other partners. It was the very tension between them, the battle of wills, the clash of approaches that had forged their greatest work. Why did Flynn, normally outspoken about his Hollywood feuds, keep the full extent of his hatred for Curtiz relatively private during his lifetime? Why did he wait until his autobiography, published posthumously, to reveal the depth of their conflict? The answer lies in the studio system that controlled both men's careers. Warner Brothers had invested heavily in the Flynn-Curtiz partnership, building a valuable brand around their collaborations. Public acknowledgement of their mutual hatred would have damaged that brand and potentially limited Flynn's career options. Jack Warner, the studio head who functioned as both men's boss, deliberately kept them together despite knowing about their conflicts. According to Warner's memoir, he believed their tension created productive creative friction and improved their films. Warner, a notorious autocrat, was also sending a clear message. Stars and directors were studio property, and personal feelings were irrelevant to business decisions. Flynn also understood the power dynamics at play. Curtiz had directed over 30 films before Flynn arrived at Warner Brothers. The Hungarian was considered a reliable professional, while Flynn, despite his stardom, carried a reputation for difficult behavior and unreliability. His frequent tardiness, occasional drunkenness on set, and womanizing had created problems for multiple productions. In Hollywood's hierarchy, established directors typically held more long-term power than actors, even famous ones. Flynn knew that openly declaring war on Curtiz might force the studio to choose sides, a battle he wasn't certain he would win. As he once confided to co-star Bruce Cabot, "I could walk away tomorrow and make a good living, but this is all I know now. I need the studio more than they need me." There was also the matter of Flynn's carefully constructed public image. The swashbuckling hero of the screen couldn't admit to being bullied, humiliated, or emotionally wounded by his director. The masculine ideal Flynn portrayed required projecting strength and confidence, not vulnerability. In an era when leading men were expected to embody unwavering courage and resilience, admitting to psychological damage from Curtiz's abuse would have undermined Flynn's star persona. So he smiled for the cameras. He attended premieres. He gave interviews praising the films without mentioning the painful experiences behind them. He saved his true feelings for private conversations and eventually his memoirs. By the time My Wicked, Wicked Ways was published in 1959, the year of Flynn's death at age 50, both men's golden era had passed. The Hollywood studio system was collapsing. The truth could finally emerge without commercial consequences. But the damage had been done. Decades of suppressed rage had contributed to Flynn's self-destructive behaviors. The drinking, the fighting, the reckless relationships that defined his later years as much as his films defined his early career. In his autobiography, Flynn wrote, "I sometimes wonder who I might have become without Curtiz's shadow over me. Would I have been a different actor, a different man, or was our mutual hatred the fire that forged whatever was good in those films? I'll never know the answer, but I know the cost. Remember that confrontation on the Charge of the Light Brigade set? The tripwires, the fallen horses, the shouting match that nearly turned violent? That moment crystallized everything that made this relationship so toxic. Curtiz's willingness to sacrifice anything, animals, actors, human decency, for his art. Flynn's emotional volatility and deep-seated insecurity beneath his heroic persona. The studio system that kept them locked together despite their mutual hatred. Who did Errol Flynn truly hate most in his tumultuous life? The evidence points clearly to Michael Curtiz, the man who simultaneously created and tortured him, who made him a star while making him miserable, who gave him a career while taking his dignity. Their 8 films together stand as testaments to a paradox, that beauty can emerge from hostility, that art doesn't require harmony, that sometimes the most magnetic performances come from genuine contempt. Flynn died in 1959. his body ravaged by decades of excess, looking 20 years older than his actual age of 50. His last words reportedly were, "I've had a hell of a lot of fun and I've enjoyed every minute of it." Whether that bravado was genuine or a final performance remains one of Hollywood's enduring mysteries. Curtiz followed in 1962, working until nearly the end despite the industry having largely passed him by. Neither man ever fully escaped the shadow of their collaboration or the bitterness it engendered. In Hollywood's golden age, the camera captured swashbuckling adventures and romantic triumphs. What it never showed were the broken men behind the illusions, fighting battles far more personal and far more damaging than any stage for the screen. As Flynn wrote in the final pages of his autobiography, in words that seemed to address Curtiz directly across the chasm of their shared history, "You taught me to play a hero, but you made me know what it means to hate. I'm still not sure which lesson mattered more."